Hey everybody, I'm Chester Elton, the little brother of Byron Elton. I understand that you StretchLab franchisees are getting together to talk about how you can improve your business, attract better people, making it more profitable, and have more fun. Well, you might have heard from my brother that I'm known as the apostle of appreciation. Sometimes I'm known as the carrot guy. Found this really cool carrot baseball stuff on Evansfield flannel. You should try it out. I'm also known as the guru of gratitude. And Dave, my good buddy from Summit, can tell you that we've got lots of gratitude stones at the StretchLab in Summit, New Jersey. And let me tell you why. My co-author, Adrian Gostick, and I, we have literally written 15 books on culture, leadership, teams, with the common thread that in all those great cultures, leaders, and teams was the common thread of gratitude. Isn't that interesting that people came to work and they believed what they did mattered, they made a difference, and when they made a difference, it was noticed and it was celebrated. Well, Byron asked me if I'd put together just a few minutes with maybe a case study, some tips, some ideas on how you might improve the culture that you've already got in your StretchLab, how to attract and retain really great people, and how to really make the experience for your customers something that they just look forward to and don't want to live without. Well, I think numbers are great. I think people remember stories. And so let me tell you the story about an astronaut that I got to meet up in Lethbridge, Alberta, a Canadian astronaut. I know what you're thinking, Canada has astronauts. Yes, we've had 3, okay? Nobody more famous than Chris Hadfield, one of less than 200 people to take a walk in space. The commander. Now, you might not know this, but when they get ready to send a team up to the International Space Station, they train for years. His team trained for 12 years. Think about that, 12 years, right? And it was a very diverse team, right? There were 3 cosmonauts, 2 American astronauts, and of course the Canadian as the commander. The difference in ages was 31 years from the youngest astronaut to the oldest cosmonaut. The reason Chris has such an interesting story is because the 3 months that his team spent at the International Space Station was the most productive in the history of the space station. So as you might guess, NASA wanted to do a debrief and say, okay, what was different about this team? Which is the question I asked him. I said, so what was the determining factor? Because NASA recruits the best and the brightest. I mean, everybody that goes to NASA is smart. They're all capable. He said 2 things. And this is where I hope it'll help you build the team and the culture that you want. And frankly, that your customers and your employees deserve, right? He said, first and foremost, we knew each other's stories. So think about that. He said, we knew where everybody came from. We knew how they got here. Always interesting stories and how you end up being an astronaut, right? How they got here, what they wanted to accomplish while they were here, and where they wanted to go from here. It was really interesting that they knew each other's families, they knew their hobbies, they knew their passions, their sports teams. When Chris went to train in Russia, he didn't stay in the NASA housing, he stayed in public housing, and he learned to speak fluent Russian. Isn't that interesting? What do you think that meant to the Russian astronauts in being included in the team, right? So think about your teams. Do you know their stories, right? And if they come from different backgrounds and different languages, do you know at least a couple of words in their language? Do you know how to say please and thank you in Spanish or French or whatever the language might be, right? Do you know their cultural differences? Do you know what their religious traditions might be, what their favorite food is, right? When you know people's stories, relationships change and they get deeper. So I'd really encourage you to do that. So the number one thing he said was we knew each other's stories. He says, I think the biggest factor, which was number 2, is that, when you go to space, you obey all the rules. Because if you don't, if things go wrong in space, people die. It's pretty unforgiving. No pressure, right? He said, of all the written rules, and we knew all those and we studied them for literally over a decade, he said we had one unwritten rule that I think made all the difference and that I was very pleased to hear. And it was this, that every astronaut had to perform a random act of kindness for every other astronaut every day. Every day. Now, it was never anything big, right? It was like, I'll fix the meal, I'll clean up, I'll do the calculations, I'll clean the equipment, whatever it might be, right? And it was really interesting. I said, so why that? Why was that the biggest differentiator? And he said, because of the message it sends. Because when you're serving your people every day in little ways, right? The message is, you're on my team and I'm cheering for you. And I care about you. I care about you enough to serve you. And I love you. And he said, because of that, we never had a heated argument. Nobody ever lost their temper. Nobody's feelings got hurt, right? And we were a very cohesive team. It was all about getting the work done. And they exceeded everybody's expectations. So what are you doing to serve your people every day? Are you helping them clean up the table? Are you bringing in coffee and donuts every now and again? Are you making sure that you know people well enough so that if they've got to, take off a little early, that they're covered? Because when you do that, that's the message, that they believe what they do matters, that they matter, that they make a difference. And then that celebration piece, the expression of gratitude, like, hey, I really appreciate the way you handled Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, or that, athlete that's training for the finals, whether it's lacrosse or baseball or whatever it might be. Because when you know your customer stories and you know what they're trying to achieve and you help them get there, they will not leave you. They're not just satisfied customers, right? They're committed. They're loyal, right? They won't leave you. So a couple of things, because I got to tell you, when you create a community like that, do you know loneliness is at an all-time high? And when you create a community for your stretchologists, where they like each other and they know each other, they don't leave and they perform. I got to give you an example. I wrote down all these names because I didn't want to forget anybody. But in the Summit Stretch Lab, Neil is the guy that welcomes us, and he's in a wheelchair. He's a quadriplegic, but the guy is a music savant. And we've gotten to know each other really well. In fact, one of his girlfriends, the dog, was a big Washington Capitals hockey fan. So we got a bunch of tickets and we took him to a Devils game. It was fabulous. He got tickets from my wife to go see Billy Joel at the Garden, right? I mean, Neil is my buddy. He's my friend. We've had lunch with Neil outside of StretchLab. And then there's his buddy Zach, his compatriot in crime, who's the head stretchologist. And he recruits all the other stretchologists and interviews them and makes sure they get trained. And a lot of them are from Kane University, like Brian, Brian who played football at Kane. We talk about the Cougars all the time and who his favorite sports teams are and where he wants to go. Natalia, the only woman stretchologist right now, who's a kickboxer, great athlete, and got the best smile ever, right? Chloe, who's the other receptionist, who goes with Zach and Neil to concerts. And we bumped into her at the train station in Penn Station. Hey, Chloe, how you doing? Right? It was really great. There's Brandon and there's Shiv. There's Jorge from the Dominican Republic. We talk DR baseball all the time. Great guy. Just a great guy. And boy, does he give a good stretch, right? So these aren't just my stretchologists, right? They're my friends. And I have to tell you, I don't care who stretches me. I like them all. I do. I like them all. Think about that. I'm not waiting for Natalia. I'm not waiting for Zach. I'm not waiting for Brandon or, I know when I go there, they're going to treat me really well. We're going to have great conversations, and I really look forward to coming back. Well, when you create that community, they create that community with your customers and your patients, right? And that's where it gets really good. And I watch it. I watch Jorge talking to his customers, and he knows them, and he knows their kids, and he knows what they're working on, and he knows how to make them feel really good. There's a book I recommend over and above all the books we've written, look them up, is one called The Good Life by Robert Waldinger, a Harvard study on what creates a long, happy, and healthy life. And the number one factor was deep and meaningful relationships. That's what happens when you create a great culture, when you know people's stories, when you serve them every day with little random acts of kindness, I like to call them. Bring in coffee, bring in donuts, ask them to tell you their story. Anyway, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So from the apostle of appreciation, give me an amen. All right. Listen, I'm so delighted you're with my brother Byron. And I'm so delighted you're with Dave. We proudly tell everybody we were the very first customers to sign up for StretchLab in Summit, New Jersey. And Byron's been my hero ever since I was a little kid. You are really smart people, and you're in a great environment to ideate, to talk about how you can make things better. And hopefully in this little talk that's gone way too long, there's one or two good ideas for you. Have a great time. Be good to each other. Remember, let your people believe what they do matters. Let them make a difference. And when they make a difference, celebrate it. Take care, my friends. Cheers.